The humanitarian disaster with the water supply continues in Donetsk, and now even Russian Z-bloggers are forced to admit the obvious. It is not Ukraine that is to blame, but Russia itself and its puppets. Maxim Kalashnikov, a well-known propagandist, claimed that the crisis was caused by the disgusting, incompetent actions of the current government, which was appointed by Kremlin curators. He claimed that the water supply system in Donetsk was effectively destroyed by the actions of Moscow and its proxies. This means residents can't live a normal life. They can't take a shower, bathe their dogs after a walk, or even wash dishes. Water is infrequent, dirty and insufficient, yet authorities continue to promise new water mains that don't solve the problem. Kalashnikov also recalled that the so-called head of the DPR, Denis Pushilin, was appointed from Moscow and that no independent People's Republic ever existed. The water crisis in Donetsk was caused by the vile, incompetent actions of the current government, which was hand-picked by Kremlin handlers, Kalashnikov admitted. Thus, even Russian propagandists openly say it was the Kremlin that brought Donbass to a social catastrophe from which there is no escape in sight. All this is increasing dissatisfaction with the Kremlin among the local population. Donetsk residents say the situation in the region has been much better under Ukrainian rule. Recall that amid the catastrophic water situation in the occupied part of Donbass, the Kremlin decided to hold a show-off meeting between Putin and Pushilin. Journalists emphasize that this is the first time in a long time that Putin has publicly met with Denis Pushilin, the man Russia calls the leader of the DPR. The water supply situation is deteriorating daily, forcing Russian authorities to stage a show of recognition that Putin is aware of the problem and is addressing it. According to Pushilin himself, water is supplied once every 3 days for a few hours in Donetsk, and Makiivka once every 2 days in Mariupol, and once every 4 days in Yenakievo. Water losses in the networks in some places reach 60%. He admitted that up to 100 breaks are repaired daily, and during peak periods, the number of breaks reached 2,000 per week. Pushilin also claimed that Ukraine hadn't repaired the network for decades. In reality, the region's water supply system was disrupted by shelling during the Russian military offensive in 2022, according to Bellingcat. Moscow blamed Ukraine for the problems. Russian authorities intend to spend hundreds of millions of rubles reconstructing the facilities of the Crimean port of the Kerch ferry crossing, which connects the Crimean peninsula with the Krasnodar Krai in neighboring Russia. Before the construction of the Kerch bridge, the crossing was the main transport and logistics hub between these regions. During Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it was also used for military purposes. Krim.Reli explains what awaits the ferry service between Crimea and Russia now. For many years, the Kerch ferry crossing was the main means of transport and cargo communication between Crimea and neighboring Russia. 24 ferries operated between Crimean and Russian ports. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 and opened the Kerch Strait Bridge, the need for the crossing disappeared. It was reinstated under duress, following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and now the crossing faces changes. In September, the Federal State Unitary Enterprise Research and Design Institute of Testing Machines, Instruments and Mass Measuring Instruments announced the procurement of design services for the project reconstruction of hydraulic structures of the ferry crossing port Crimea. This port handles passenger transportation and the handling of ferries, cargo ships and barges used for transporting equipment. The technical condition of the Crimea port's hydraulic structures has been deemed of limited operability due to the need to change the the operating mode and perform repair work, according to the tender documentation. The project includes reconstruction of the service and auxiliary pier and the coastal protection of the southern protective structure, creating a unified embankment and constructing platforms for lowering ferry ramps during mooring. The coastal protection of the port's northern protective structure is also planned. According to the documents, these works are planned to be completed in December 2028. Russian authorities are planning such long-term projects despite military realities. After Russian authorities unilaterally built a bridge across the Kerch Strait, the crossing was closed for several years as unnecessary, and attempts were even made to sell off its ferries. Ferries have resumed service between Crimea and Russia after the Ukrainian armed forces launched successful attacks on the Kerch Bridge, leading to a transport collapse on the Crimean Peninsula. The Russian authorities used the Kerch ferry crossing not only for civilian purposes, but also for military logistics. Following the successful attacks on the Kerch Bridge, ferries from Russia to Crimea began transporting military cargo. The Ukrainian armed forces stated, "The attacks on the ferry crossing and port in Kerch are affecting the logistics of the Russian army in Crimea and the supply of its units on the southern front in Ukraine," the Ukrainian armed forces stated. The deterioration in the railway crossing's capacity following the attack on the Kerch ferry crossing apparently led to significant temporary disruptions in Russia's military logistics operations. The British Ministry of Defence stated at the time, "The affected ferries almost certainly were the primary means of transporting Russian trains carrying fuel and ammunition to Crimea due to the tight security measures in place at the Kerch Bridge," the department stated. The Ukrainian strike on the ferry crossings and the subsequent attack on a nearby fuel depot once again highlights the vulnerability of the Kerch Strait to Ukrainian strikes. Despite Russia's significant investments in security and air defense, the statement said. After the attack on the Kerch ferry crossing, it continued to provide military logistics for the Russian Federation for some time, stated Ukrainian Navy spokesman Dmitry Pletenchuk. In this regard, he calls the Kerch Strait crossing a legitimate military target. According to Pletenchuk, Russia is trying to protect the Kerch Strait crossing, but is unable to do so 100%.